Hello, I'm Mei Rado, Assistant Professor at Barr Graduate Center. On behalf of our faculty and our director, Susan Weber, I would like to welcome you to tonight's Françoise and George Saut's lecture on 18th and 19th century French decorative arts. A name familiar to all of you, François Boucher is often considered as the quintessential Rococo painter. Diderot famously states that Boucher has everything except the truth. Yet, generations of scholars have never stopped in searching the truth of Boucher and his work. A talented artist who commanded various media and held broad interests in literature, theater, and natural science. The continuing interest in Boucher have led to a number of recent exhibitions and publications. Just to name a few, the 2019 exhibition at Musée Besançon on Boucher and chinoiserie. The 2022 publications by Jessica Preber on Boucher and the art of collecting in 18th century France. Perrin Stein just published an article on Lyotard and Boucher in the June issue of the Burlington magazine. Tonight, our speaker, Professor Pastor François Bertrand, will revisit the topic of Boucher and decorative arts and will present his ongoing research. Professor Bertrand is Emeritus Professor of Art History at Université Bordeaux-Montaigne. His long academic career and many achievements are beyond what I can fit in this short introduction. Among his wide range of research interests, he's foremost a specialist of European tapestries. His monographs include Tapisserie d'Aubusson et Feuilleton, published in 1988, Les tapisseries de Babellini et la décoration d'intérieur dans la Rome baroque, published in 2005. Aubusson, Tapisserie des Lumières, published in 2013. La peinture tissée, published in 2015. From 2010 to 2015, Professor Bertrand led a project, Arachné, on the precepts, circulation of models, and transfer of savoir-faire of French tapestries from 14th to 21st centuries. Most recently, with Charissa Bremer David, he has prepared an annotated online edition of the Bouvet Tapestry Manufacturers Production Registers, 1724 to 1793, preserved at the Mobilier National. Last but not least, we are honored to announce that Professor Bertrand has a forthcoming article co-authored with Charissa Bremer David in the fall-winter issue of our journal, West 86. The article is titled, The Bouvet Tapestries Chinese Series, The New Perspectives. Professor Bertrand, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mei, for this very kind introduction. And good evening. I'm very pleased to be here. And it's a pleasure for me to speak about one book I would like to write. I'm writing this book in the moment. It's not finished, but I've written many pages. So Boucher was a quintessentially social artist working in a tight network between the academy and connoisseurs. It is a commonplace to read that Boucher worked for tapestry and porcelain, that he made drawings of various figurines, cameos, vases, fountains, and fans, and that his drawings and paintings were translated into various other techniques, enamels, marquetry, goldsmiths and silversmiths work, lacquer and printed fabrics. But the relationship between his painting and its transposition into the various decorative arts is not always clearly specified. His early biographers were much less forthcoming on this point. While they prized his talent, they did not dwell on what Boucher has been able to do in the field of decorative arts. It was 19th century art historians who carried out the first studies of Boucher's art and who emphasized the importance of his painting for the development of the decorative arts. Since then, the growth of studies in this field has enabled Boucher's work to be better defined and the history of the manufacture of various objects using different techniques to be clarified. To my knowledge, the relationship between the painter and the decorative arts has hardly been addressed from the point of view of its reception. That means that it is known that the decorative arts are involved in the process of making and survival of an artistic reputation insofar they convey a more or less precise idea of the art of an artist. We also know that artists have long used engravings to gain recognition by disseminating their main works. This process of using engraving to build artistic reputations overlaps with certain issues specific to the decorative arts. By providing models that can be transposed into various techniques, did the painter use the decorative arts to bolster his reputation? What image did the decorative arts send back to the artist? What was the situation during the painter's lifetime and later after his death? This twofold mechanism seems simple, but it is more complex than it appears because transposition could be accompanied by the loss of the artist's name, or at least it is the name of another artist that emerges, that of the master of the technique used or the factory in which the object was made. Between these two aspects of the question, should we also take into account the studio, because a painter does not generally work alone. We also know how much the studio can influence the painter's styles. All of these issues deal with intermediality. So intermediality. That is to study the transition from a medium to another. Umberto Eco once said that literary translation from a language to another is, I quote, saying almost the same thing. End of quote. Changing medium is quite similar. Intermediality allows us to better understand this equivalence. To explore the part played by the decorative arts in the process of making and maintaining an artist's reputation, I choose an artist as renowned as Boucher for two main reasons. Firstly, because his work is transposed into a wide range of mediums and techniques, and the corpus of his work is broadly defined by the many previous studies. Secondly, choosing Boucher was an obvious choice because he is a quintessential Rococo painter. He was and remained a painter in the service of luxury and the decorative arts, as Jeff Koons recently reasserted with a series of masters edited by Louis Vuitton. A masterpiece is printed in the front of classic Vuitton bag silhouettes with the original painter's name in capital letters. What's interesting for our purpose is the association of a reference to a great master, Titian, Rubens, Monet, Da Vinci, Turner, Boucher, and so on, with a luxury object, a bag from a major brand. The use of capitals to write the name of the painter underlines the fact that we are not here in the realm of fine art, but in that of luggage, of the fashion industry. It is therefore possible to address the question of an artist's skill and work in the decorative arts. I have conceived this lecture as a kind of handbook of decorative arts, organizing it around few significant themes. First, what did Boucher show an interest in? Why did Boucher show an interest in the decorative arts? Also, his preoccupations were those of a painter. He also showed an interest in objets d'art by collecting them, designing books, book frontispieces, and illustrations, as well as numerous models for tapestries, porcelain, and rocaille ornaments, ranging from selling decoration to royal Easter eggs and fans. Did his various involvements in the service of manufacturers and more generally the decorative arts served as a tool to forge his reputation. It's a question of skills. Boucher was curious and eager to learn. He acquired expertise in various fields. He was a talented painter. He was an engraver from his formative years. He practiced engraving for disseminating forms and models. Boucher was also a learned man, frequenting intellectual circles, people of letters, collectors, and curious natural scientists and enthusiasts. Boucher shared an interest in science with the Enlightenment. He kept abreast of scientific research on colors, for example, and lastly, he had a great theatrical culture and he designed numerous sets from the opera and the popular theater. If the decorative arts took an important part of Boucher's work as a painter, at what point in the production process did this activity take place? Boucher's involvement was upstream in the invention of new models, whether for tapestry, ceramics, or other techniques. The novelty of making figures or group of a few figures, both in colored glazed porcelain and unglazed white porcelain biscuit, which resemble sugar, can fully justify Boucher's first design for Sèvres Vincennes manufactory. These small figure sculptures were in direct competition with foreign production, especially Jews from Meissen. What was the inventiveness? Why was this inventiveness a source of success for Boucher? It was an outstanding inventor of shapes and patterns. His drawing and paintings are seductive because Boucher favors single figures or small groups of few figures. The subject matter is simple and easy to grasp at first glance. This is one of the seductive aspects of his art. Boucher had a most fertile imagination, which allowed him to continually renew himself. He drew many of his models from the pieces of his collection. But what did Boucher paint and draw? Boucher's paintings are characterized by a number of key themes. universal and timeless subjects such as children, pastoral scenes, and landscapes. These painted subjects were later used in tapestry and porcelain, both in painted decor and in sculpted groups. Widely disseminated through engraving, they were translated into a variety of other media. Children are a cherished theme in the antique Philostratus Aecones. They appeared early in Boucher's career in the overdoors painted for the lawyer D'Herbe. They can be found in a wall hanging and in chair upholstery produced at the Manufacture des Gobelins for Madame de Pompadour, and in the various series of putties and children painted and drawn, transposed in colored glazed porcelain and white biscuit by different sculptors and manufacturers. Les enfants Boucher were grouped in series of different size, large, medium, and small, with different selling prices, 24, 18 and 12 livres each. Shepherds that populate Boucher's pastoral paintings can be found in Beauvais tapestries and Vincennes and Sèvres porcelain. These pleasing and naive little scenes are reminiscent of fashionable pastorals novel and scenes performed at the Théâtre de la Foire, which were very popular. So, what could be more attractive than a replica of this subject on tapestry hung on the walls of flats and into figurines that adorn dessert table trays? The owners of the houses and their guests could just rejoice at the sight of shepherds reenacting stories, suggesting views of the heroes of their favorite readings and shows, pastoral poetry in all its forms. It was a universal character of the pastoral that allowed it to reach so many people. Landscapes goes hand in hand with pastoral. It is a part of Boucher's painting that Jean-Bernard Restou prized in The Life of the Painter, published just after his death. Boucher, I quote, Boucher also practiced the genre of landscape, especially since he was attached to the Beauvais manufacture. The hangings executed from his painting are highly esteemed by connoisseurs. The skies are well rendered in a cheerful and luminous color. The trees are touched with great lightness. His air of heads are witty, his attitudes graceful and varied with taste. It must be admitted, however, that nature always appears embellished with the colors of the imagination. End quote. Abbé Leblanc has already prized the Beauvais tapestries after Boucher's drawing for the importance of the landscape, which greatly renewed the old tapestries with historical subjects that were considered old-fashioned and boring as hell. Landscape, with or without small figures, can be found in tapestries and in the various transpositions of his paintings in other media, with the exception of the small porcelain figures depicting only characters. These themes made Boucher famous, not only for the artistic quality of his painting, but also for their dissemination through engraving and the decorative arts. How was the relationship between the arts perceived? During the Renaissance, the arts were divided into two categories: the noble arts of painting, sculpture, and architecture, and the others are on the other arts, which were later called decorative. In the same times, they were united by the concept of disegno, according its two aspects, intellectual and manual. During the 18th century, each art was valued for the amount of invention it contained. In monographs of the painter, Le Peintre des Grâces, and his pastoral paintings are talking a place of pride, but there is often a more or less extensive chapter on Boucher and the decorative arts. The presence of these chapters invites us to examine the relationship so dear to Erwin Panofsky between the fine arts and the other arts. It has been noted that the act of painting in large-scale format for tapestry workshops contributed to the rise in fame of the painter. All great painters, such as Raphael and Rubens, worked in this way. Painted tapestry cartoons were an ordinary task for an 18th century painter. According to the critic La Fontaine, tapestry was the shelter of painting, which was reduced to being housed in altarpieces of churches and in the overdoors and overmantels of modern interior. Receiving orders for tapestry cartoons was therefore salutary for a painter. By fulfilling tapestry cartoon orders, Boucher was fully aware of this role as a painter. He also understood perfectly what was expected in this medium. He designed cartoons with small groups of figures arranged side by side on the foreground. This process allowed him to play with the widths of the pieces according to the customer's wishes. Let's change of register. What was Boucher's interest in the art of porcelain? Was it the newness of the product? The glossy glazed appearance was criticized for the thickness of the glaze, which was not uniform and showed over thicknesses in cavities, for example. The matte aspect of the biscuit was much appreciated. In any case, the whiteness gave rise to a new aesthetic, in contrast to the flickering colors of glazed terracotta figurine and statuettes. Bright lights and vivid colors produced an involuntary eye movement that prevents the gaze from focusing. Here, scientific considerations, as opposed to color considerations, seems to motivate Boucher. In any case, Boucher's involvement with porcelain art is indirect, through drawing and engraving. Numerous models of various figures, vases, screens, and fans of his own invention are known to have been engraved by various artists. Such engravings were easily reproducible and transportable into various media. Boucher worked as a painter, draughtsman, and decorative artist, like Meissonier and Lajoux, with whom he was associated. He also had good reason to work for the Vincennes manufactory. Both the painter and the workshop had Madame de Pompadour as patron, and a number of tax collectors were among the main customers of the Beauvais tapestry factory too. Working for manufacturers means to provide models that can be transposed into their other techniques. That raises the question of production control. What part does the painter play in this process? Was he consulted about the weaving process, the finished look of the work, the color scheme? Could Boucher give his opinion on the transposition of his drawings into three-dimensional sculptures? Or Was this translation the responsibility of the person in charge of the process at the manufacture of Vincennes Sèvres? This question raised the broader issue of authorship. What could Boucher control about the image sent back by the decorative arts? First and foremost, he used tapestry to disseminate his art, proposing tapestry cartoon adapted to the taste of the day. The Fêtes Italiennes revived the theme of the Flemish Fall Festival, integrated into landscapes evocative of Italy. He then gave the tapestry weaver a selection of his painting that he considered the most significant of his art, to make it clear that it was this image of his art that he wanted to preserve, such as La Fontaine d'Amour, La Pipe aux Oiseaux, and so on. He then extended the application of this principle to the Gobelins in the famous Tenture de Boucher hangings, where most of the dearest themes were shown, such as Venus and Vulcan, Neptune and Amymone, Bacchus and Ariadne, or the fortune tellers, and so on. Boucher provided the manufacturers with models that reflected the image he wanted to project of his art. It was equally attentive to the aesthetic quality of the cartoons he delivered to manufacturers. An example of this adaptation is particularly revealing. For the Beauvais tapestry of Venus and Vulcan from the Amour des Dieux series, Boucher first conceived a rather limited cartoon in terms of figure, known by a drawing in the Louvre. The translation of this model was fairly faithful. However, from the fourth weaving onwards, a strip of cartoon was added between the figure of the lictor in the foreground here and that of Vulcan, to stretch the composition and to give it greater breadth. However, this addition was not applied systematically. You see, yeah, oops, sorry. You have here the lictor and the figure of Vulcan, and you have a space between a new strip of cartoon that is added. However, this addition was not applied systematically, and Tapestry's editions, such as the one for the King of Prussia, do not take it into account. The unanswerable question is, who was behind this change? Boucher himself, the contractors, or the customers? The Venus and Vulcan tapestry is also a remarkable example of the tapestry maker's ability to copy Boucher's color scheme. All the various weaving have a very strong Rubenesque color, showing how faithful the transposition was to what the tapestry cartoon should have been. Tapestry weavers transpose the color of a cartoon with great precision. If we question what the painter's work was, we must also look at what did not belong to him. Boucher's Beauvais tapestry for furniture were rarely woven. Boucher's only designed such tapestry for the Gobelins, as we have said. Boucher's seat tapestries were woven in the 1760s. Prior to this, Boucher had monopolized the work. Since the creation of the manufacture, tapestry cartoon for seats have been the responsibility of the contractors, unlike wall tapestry cartoons, which were paid by the king. Oudry, painter and then co-director, therefore painted a large number of tapestry patterns for seats, helping to make the manufactory his kingdom. The hanging were accompanied by furniture woven on Audrey's design for many years after his death. It was until the early 1760s that painters had manufactured design models copying figures from Boucher cartoons, mainly from the Noble Pastoral series. The figurines produced at the Manufacture de Sèvres ask the question in other terms. It's another change from drawing on a sheet of paper to three-dimensional sculpture. Modelers and sculptors of the factory, the De la Rue Falconet and others, were fully involved in the process. At the same time, they produced engravings of the figurines, which are placed in portfolios for dissemination. This process introduces another change, modifying the author's name. Also, Boucher's name appears as the inventor of in the engravings. The sculpted children lose the painter's name and take on that of the sculpture, the De la Rue, Falconet, Blondeau, who are then considered as the authors. A similar process takes place for the cameo design by the cameo designs invented by Boucher but created by sculptor Jacques Leguet, also known from the engravings executed by Madame de Pompadour. The painting of porcelain decors based on Boucher's painting at the Vincennes factory raises a new question, that of the distribution of models. These decorations appear according to a calendar that follows the announcement of the publication of engravings in Social Gazette. If the drawing is faithful, the coloring differs, since the model is not often a painting but an engraving. Sometimes it is the translation of a drawing technique that is sought. Some rose cameo decorations are imitations of Sanguine drawings, such as used on bottle coolers, also known as seaux à bouteille ordinaire. Boucher's painting, transposed into engraving, became images that were widely used as decorative objects, framed and hung on walls. They were also collected in portfolios, making up repertoire of models useful to all workshops in France and Europe working in a variety of techniques: tapestry, ceramics, goldsmith and jewelry, and cabinet making. These images are disseminated through the usual channels of the luxury market and diplomatic relations. Many things have been said on this topic. I just would like to emphasize on 3 points. First, engraving circulate very quickly. Boucher figurines transposed by modeler Peter Reinicke from engravings can be found as early as 1747 in Meissen, Saxony. Second, the luxury goods market was dominated by Marchand Mercier, who introduced fashions both in France and abroad. English merchants specialized in Sèvres porcelain, which was sought after despite its exorbitant price due to high custom duties. By the middle of the century, goldsmiths and jewelers were already producing a large number of snuff boxes and other small boxes decorated with enamel paint, which drew their model from reproduction engravings. And third, the King of France made extensive use of the products of his manufactures as diplomatic gifts and for furnishing his embassies abroad in order to maintain his lustre. He constantly purchased tapestries and porcelain for his purpose. the court of Bourbon in Spain, of Spain in Parma, very Francophile, had Beauvais tapestries woven after Boucher and Sèvres porcelain, and the King of Prussia has Beauvais tapestry and one of the finest collections of stone and metal vases made after Boucher's drawing. This explains why replicas of Boucher's porcelain were made abroad, in the Italian factories of Dorcia, which copied the porcelain of the court of Parma, and then in Derby, England, where the Duke of Bedford's works of art were copied, and again in St. Petersburg, Berlin, Vienna, and or elsewhere. The question of model dissemination raises another issue, that of the cohabitation of styles. History of art, as it has been written, has led to a succession of styles, some rejecting others, according to a principle of progress, of modernity, leaving little room for the cohabitation of styles. The Rocaille decorative art, for example, enjoyed a glorious period at the same time as the neoclassical style emerged. Boucher's painting was criticized from the middle of the century as it no longer lived up to the expectation of the critics, insofar as the subjects painted showed a lack of appropriatedness and unnatural coloring. But at the same time, tapestries and porcelain after Boucher were sought after by collectors and amateurs, many of whom were the same people. The same is true for painting by Watteau, Lancret, and Teniers. In this process of dissemination, the workshop's role is just as important as that of the painter. It deserves to be much more developed than I am about to do. The number of studio replicas of Boucher's cartoon is considerable. Why did so many paintings come in different formats? There are several replicas of the fortune teller from the Beauvais Fêtes Italian series made after Boucher and his studio, none of them similar to the original, only known through the various tapestry weaving. And I just show two of them. I've already wondered about the role of Boucher's assistants and collaborators, such as Jean-Joseph Dumont and Jacques-Nicolas Julliard, who widely disseminated the painter's style through the cartoons they painted for the Aubusson tapestry workshops. The best quality pieces from this production were mainly destined for foreign customers. These painters were also involved at Beauvais and Les Gobelins, working in close collaboration with Boucher. Dumont was the creator of Boucher, who appointed him painter to the Aubusson tapestry factory. In 1742, Oudry and Boucher asked Dumont to paint the cartoons for the Boucher Chinese series, as Boucher was overloaded with work. However, Boucher retouched the cartoons, which were also approved by Oudry before being put on the loom. On Oudry's death, Dumont was appointed painter to the Beauvais factory. He was an artist in the shadows, gifted with the ability to assimilate the art of his masters. He supplied Aubusson with cartoons in the manner of Oudry, then Boucher. Julliard was a landscape painter trained in Boucher's studio. In his own words, he painted the landscape backgrounds for Boucher's painting. His cartoons for Aubusson are in the manner of Boucher's painting. He also worked at the Gobelin in the 1770s. The works of Boucher's pupil and followers must be taken into account, as tapestries after Deshayes, Le Prince en Duet have no long passed for works by Boucher. It is now possible to define more precisely the periods during which Boucher's art was valued by the decorative arts. Shortly before the middle of the century, the decorative arts seized on Boucher's art and reproduced it in all techniques: tapestry, porcelain, goldsmithry, marquetry. His distaste for Boucher's art and for Rococo art in general continued until the end of the century. There was, however, a surge of interest in the 1770s, shortly after Boucher's death. This is part of a commemorative process. Dumont painted a copy of the Tentures Chinoises cartoons on the pretext that they were worn. They were only partially used once for the 10th and final edition in 3 pieces for the Contrôleur Général Menon d'Invaux. One piece of this set has recently been identified. In 1775 and 76, Louis-François Lécaut decorated 3 egg vases with Chinese decoration after Boucher for Marie Antoinette. Thus, the replica of large porcelain plate of the 1734 Renault and Armide should also be placed in this Boucher mania context. Why choosing the Painters Academy reception piece, which is a scholarly work responding to specific expectations far removed from the idea we had of Boucher? Was this a bravura piece for Dodin, the painter, who used the original painting for copying it and insisted on signing the plaque by adding the words d'après Boucher, end quote. It is this extension of taste can also be recognized in German production at the Hearst porcelain factory, where in the 1770s sculptor Johann Peter Melchior used an engraving by René Gaillard to decorate a vase. In the 19th century, Boucher continued to be fashionable and copied. During the Second Empire and the Third French Republic, Boucher became an artist appreciated and sought after by connoisseurs. The Goncourt family brought him back into the limelight with their works on 18th century art. He was collected by some of the greatest names in the art world: the Rothschilds, the Marquises of Hertford and Sir Richard Wallace, Nissim de Camondo, and many others. Boucher's tapestries and porcelain are sought after and collected. Tapestries from the Noble Pastoral series are still at Waddesdon Manor, giving an image of what was thought to be the atmosphere of Versailles. Boucher's taste was emerging. Let's take just 2 examples to illustrate this phenomenon. First, a forefront secretary made by Molitor in the early 19th century, adorned with the Dodin porcelain plaque already mentioned. This plaque was placed on the front of the secretary, probably on the initiative of the dealer Duveen, when the secretary left the Rothschild collections. It's a creation that introduced a new appreciation of Boucher's work. Second, a large vase from the Gustavsberg porcelain factory in Sweden, whose body is decorated with a copy of Boucher's Triumph of Venus, one of his masterpieces acquired by Queen Louisa Ulrica through the diplomat, architect, and collector Carl Gustav Tessin. This object is a technical achievement. Made in Sweden, it is more emblematic of Swedish ceramics and painting than Boucher's art. In the 20th century, Boucher's art, like that of other 18th century artists, can be seen in museums where contemporary artists draw their inspiration from it. That's what the great fashion designer Vivienne Westwood said to explain the bodies she made by printing a photograph of the Wallace collection painting of Daphnis and Chloe onto the garment slightly over center. It's still early to draw conclusions. Our thinking on the making and keeping of an artist's fame allows us to better understand the role played by the decorative arts in Boucher's art. Boucher was one of the most successful artists of his time. He had talent. He was at the head of an important studio. He knew how to work with people who had their own skills. As a result, he also became a name, a company, a brand, insofar as the work resulted from the combined skills of the various people involved. Combining intermediality with the artist's name reveals what is prevailing beyond the names of the designer, Boucher, and those of the performers, specialists of the various techniques. Thinking on intermediality allows us to better grasp how the workers who interpreted Boucher did, I quote, almost the same thing, end quote, to reuse the Humberto Eco expression I refer at the beginning of my lecture. Understanding how each contributor adapts Boucher's art according to his own skills and sensibility help us better grasp the taste of an area for an artist. Thank you for listening.
So now we have some time for questions. I just have two ground rules. One is in the spirit of generosity, please, if you have any statements or anything that you want to share, we'll have plenty of time to talk out there in the lobby. And second, no preambles. Please jump right into the question because it'll give more space for everyone to ask questions since I'm sure there are a lot out there. So please raise your hand if you have any questions.
You showed the Wallace collection cartoon designs of sunset and sunrise, which are enormous, and they're on canvas. I'm used to tapestry cartoons earlier on being on paper. Would those two paintings have been in the workshop while the tapestries were being created? Did that make sense?
I'm not sure to understand well what you said. Why
Dans le 6e siècle, les les cartons pour le tapis étaient sur papier.
yes,
Et c'était dans l'étalier où il faisait la tapisserie avec un tableau de cette taille sur un canvas. Est-ce que c'était aussi dans l'atelier quand il fait la tapisserie?
these tapestries were ordered for Madame de Pompadour. So the cartoons, as said, were paid by the king all the time. The king paid for the cartoon for every workshops, and especially for the Gobelin, because the Gobelin works mostly for the king. And they are the cartoons in France from the 17th century were done on canvas. And the use of cartoon on paper is mainly a Brussels specialty or in France. The weavers use canvases, and the canvas were after used in the decoration of the houses. Yes, you're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. I was wondering, what do you think it is about Boucher's designs that has prompted designers like Vivienne Westwood and Louis Vuitton to take those images and incorporate them into their clothing designs? Yeah, you showed the corset by Vivienne Westwood, and the bags by Louis Vuitton that have Boucher's designs. I was wondering what you think it is about Boucher and his imagery that has made more modern and contemporary designers use those images.
I'm sorry, I have some problem.
What do you think about modern designers' take on Boucher's images?
The modern. Yes, what I think about Louis Vuitton, my opinion has no interest. No, it's not the question. The question is that Louis Vuitton used this image as he used other images of other painters, and he makes this but he was not the first to do that. Some painters did the same about 20 years ago before him, and the use of master painters by Vuitton is a sort of joke. No?
I think it's the frivolity and the luxuriousness that people might have been attracted to also.
We have a question back here.
Thank you. You mentioned Boucher, his Easter eggs, and one thinks of the Romanovs and the imperial Easter eggs. You did show a garniture of Easter egg inspired porcelain. Did he ever make pure Easter eggs? Was he responsible for eggs? And if so, where are they? In what collection?
The Easter egg? I don't know where they are. I'm sorry. Maybe somebody knows.
Any other questions? Yes, right here. Would you mind passing this down?
Who were the principal arbiters of taste who denounced or turned against Boucher?
I don't. Sorry.
Le goût de la période a changé. Il y avait des arbiters, des tastemakers, who turned against Boucher's style toward the neoclassical. Who were they? Who were these arbiters of taste?
The people who make the taste. I think that they are the critics, such as Diderot first, and La Fontaine, as I mentioned, because if I remember in the the critics he did of the Salon of 1752 or 53. He has a very hard critic of the two paintings of the sunrise and the sunset, made for the weaving of the tapestries for Madame de Pompadour. That's these people, and after art history use this, and because also the fine arts are most important until the end of the 20th century. There is a change. There is a material turn at that time in the 1980s, and the fine arts lost their importance, and maybe that's an explanation of why we are looking after the materiality of the art today.
Thank you. Any other questions? Did you have a question?
Apropos of Vivienne Westwood's corset, we all know about the shock of the new, but there's also the shock of the old. And why do artists turn to old works? Because on the one hand, they're familiar, and yet at the same time, they're shockingly new. And why does Picasso go back a century and paint his version of Delacroix's Women of Algiers? It's because you can take an image and transform it. Now, some might argue better not to transform it the way you're transforming it, but nonetheless, that's one of the ways that art works, is you take something and you restate it. We all like it when, in the Renaissance, they went back to classical models, or when Ang, in the beginning of his career, and Flaxman went back to classical Greek vases. And I don't know if we have to accept it, but I think that's what Vivienne Westwood is doing as well. And we're titillated by it, as much as we may be disgusted by it.
You had a question?
Since we're on Vivienne Westwood, I'll just say there's an article by Robert Wellington, a former CELTS lecturer, on Vivienne Westwood's use of 18th century iconography in Journal 18, and I can give you the reference afterwards. I wanted to ask you, Professor Bertrand, you sketched for us a very specific story about Boucher at a very specific time, very specific institutions, and very specific people. But I wonder if your model of an artist, a painter, strategically mobilizing the talents of other media to enrich his fame, is this something we can generalize? Are there other artists who did the same in the 18th century, in the 17th century, 19th century, or today? I would love to know if you think there are parallel figures that meet this idea of strategic exploitation of the decorative arts to reinforce fame.
Yes, I understand what you mean, but it's possible to do this, to have this approach for all the artists, but theoretically, because in the practice, you can easily see that some artists have used the decorative art, and the decorative arts in return send an image of the artist. But some painters too did not use, or they don't use so much these the decorative arts. Take Fragonard, for example, is less his painting is less translated into say porcelain, or there's no tapestry or one or two tapestry after Fragonard. And why? That's the question, and it's I have no answer for the moment. Yes.
Hello, thank you very much. I also have a question about Boucher's strategy. You spoke a little bit about why he chose particular media, why he liked to design for ceramics or tapestries. Could you say a little bit more about whether you think he had a strategy about designing for particular manufacturers? That did he refuse to personally make designs for certain manufacturers because he considered them to be bad for his image? Obviously, you can imagine he would try to design for the highest, the best. But do you see that kind of strategy in his work?
Yes, I think that Boucher used a strategy. Is it a strategy or is it an opportunity? I don't know exactly. That's not the same thing, but he was involved into tapestry because his friend Audrey asked him to do cartoons. But on the other side, he gave only few designs, the drawings for Sèvres. It's not really clear. We know this a bit better now, but he gave drawings at the beginning, just before the middle of the century, and we know that he was paid in 1752, but we don't know a lot. And I think it's because it's the difference of the medium, and maybe he was interested or not in the biscuit. I don't know, but it cannot control the process of making porcelain as he was able to control the one for tapestry. And for the techniques, it's a bit the same.
Any other questions? Well, then please join me in thanking Pascal Bertrand for this evening.